All right, so hi guys, my name is Makeda Andargachew. I go to Hunter College and I study social psychology, and I'm also getting a public policy certificate in health policy. My favorite color is pink, but I love pastel colors, I think, and I also love dark colors, obviously. Um, Anything else? Oh wait, I'm also Ethiopian American. Yeah.
Um, yep. I'm glad you brought up that last point because we're going to be talking about identity and how that identity has shaped your choices, and not just your cultural identity, but also your personal identity, things you identify with, and how all of that has come together to influence you into the beautiful person you are today. So my first question is, what are some aspects of your identity or some identities that you identify strongly with?
I strongly identify with being Ethiopian American, like I said earlier. In terms of, would you like me to elaborate on each thing, or do you want me to
Yes,
just focus
please.
on it? Okay. So in terms of culture, I've always been pushed and pulled between what it means to be Ethiopian and what it means to be American. Um, I the only Ethiopian influence that I have in my life is just my parents. We don't really live in an Ethiopian neighborhood, and all of our relatives are all the way back home, and there are like pockets of Ethiopian communities in other states, like in Philadelphia and in Orange County. So I've always struggled with being Ethiopian because that I felt like I never really had enough characteristics. I couldn't really speak the language properly until I became a teenager, and even then, I obviously speak it with an American accent, and it's very obvious whenever I go to Ethiopia how different I am. But then there's also being American and how people don't really know what it means. People don't really know what Ethiopia is. I've had people say, "Are you Asian?" And I'm just like, "No, that's not, no, I'm not Asian." But so basically people don't know what Ethiopia is. I'm seen as a Black person, which, and I've also struggled with that because I feel like I don't exactly have Black culture either. Like yeah, basically, like, I don't really identify strongly with being Black because that, my history traces back to Ethiopia. Whenever I hear about the civil rights movement or whenever I hear about slavery, those are things that, don't necessarily resonate with me. They're not things that I feel personally connected to because I'm just simply not. And on top of that, there are aspects of culture that I just am not really aware of since I grew up very sheltered in my household. And the only two places that I went to for a very long time were just school and home. So I didn't really have the opportunity to explore that.
So, with all this conflict between identities, how much of an influence do you feel like this has had on both your professional life and your personal life?
In terms of my professional life, I've always wondered sometimes, like, I've noticed that I've often been the only Black person in the room, or the only like Ethiopian American person, and it's sort of been like, am I wait, is this, can I count school as like a part of professional
Yes.
life? Okay, so like, given that for my entire life, my entire childhood, I was often like, the minority of the school. Like at Brooklyn Tech, I think only 5% of the school was Black, and
Somewhere around there.
yeah, and like in my middle school, only like 1% of the school was Black. And in my elementary school, although there was like a decent amount of minorities, I was one of the few Black kids in the talented and gifted program. So I've always felt, in a sense, that I had this responsibility to be a good representative of like the Black population, in a sense, because that, you know, the amount of times that people have, for example, doubted my ability to do math because that I'm Black. Like I vividly remember this one time in middle school when there was this girl who was struggling with her math work, and I was like, "Hey, like, do you need any help with that?" And then she's like, "Oh no, like, I'd rather ask the Asian girl over there." And I was just like, but I didn't understand it as like racism at that point, since I was like, 11, and I was just kind of like, okay, like that's a bit strange, but you have fun with your multiplication, my friend. But yeah, it's like, it's kind of like that. I've finally learned to let go of the idea that I represent anyone but myself. I don't represent populations. I don't represent, Black females, Black people, or females, or Ethiopian Americans. I just represent myself, and that's something that's kind of like the evolution of my mindset.
I feel like it's really important that you brought up that fact of feeling that you don't represent this entire group, this entire population. You are just yourself. And this wasn't one of my planned questions, but we're gonna have a couple of unplanned ones. But
I see.
what is some advice that you would give to someone who was in your position previously, who had the feeling like they were being forced to represent a greater population than they actually are?
Well, I would kind of let them know what I was talking about before. It's ridiculous to think that one human being could represent an entire population of human beings, and that's why, I like, on demographics questions, they're kind of ridiculous, because it's just like, why does it actually matter that I'm African American? Why does it matter that I'm female? Why does my income matter? What is this going to be really used for? It's just a statistical thing. What you are just yourself, and your identity characteristics are things that come after. They are secondary to who you are as a person. There's so many things about a human being that's so much deeper than, your skin color, or whether you're male or female, or anywhere in between. It's just, I would just tell them that, to really hold on to the idea that they are themselves, and that is all I am is Makeda Andargachew. I'm like, that's what I identify as. I'm just Makeda Andargachew. You know what I mean?
Yep, I know exactly what you mean. Okay. My next question for you would be, what are some aspects of your personal cultural identity that you feel have changed as you've grown up?
When I was younger, I used to be really I really, really, really wanted to be interpreted as like an Ethiopian in Ethiopia. Um, every single time I went to Ethiopia, there was always this very strong disconnect between me and other people, because that I was obviously an American person, and I would be really upset that people didn't see me as Ethiopian. I would change the way that I spoke. I would really, really try to get rid of my accent. I would pretend like I was comfortable with, for example, um, like with certain, like praying before I eat, certain cultural rituals that just weren't me. And right now, I've kind of learned to let go of the idea that I have to be a certain type of way in order to be Ethiopian. If I identify as Ethiopian, you know, then that's just it. I don't have to be like my family members. I don't have to be like the average Ethiopian, because being, you know, identifying with a culture is a lot more than just being a certain type of person. It's just your interaction with the culture itself.
Okay. I actually had a different question planned after this, but because you brought this up, can you give
Oh,
an
I'm
example of
really I'm really spicing this up for you, aren't I?
yes, as you always do. Um, can you give an example of a time where you feel like your culture or your identity has changed the way that you would normally act or behave, or your perceived cultural identity has changed the way you would normally act or behave?
Um, I can. So in the summer of 2018, I had gone to Ethiopia, and I met my cousin's children for the first time. And one of them, I was named after me, because I was 10 years old, and I was like, a perfect name for a person is obviously Makeda.
Of course.
So exactly, you know what I mean.
Yep.
But we were planning for her birthday party, and I wait, can I actually bring up two stories, by the way?
Yes, you can bring up as many as you like.
Okay. So we were getting things. We were getting like decorative things for the party. And I had gone up to the store clerk, and I was like, "Do you have balloons?" I said it in Amharic, and the first thing that she had said to me was, she didn't even say it to me. She said it to my cousin. She was like, "Where's she from? What type of Amharic is this?" And she was saying it right in front of me in Amharic as if I didn't understand what she was saying. And the second time was, wait, hang on. I kind of forgot your question. Could you just repeat?
Basically, what's a time where you have changed your behavior because of your culture or because of the culture you wanted to be perceived as?
Right. That ended up really impacting the way that I like spoke Amharic. Like I became hyper focused on just getting the perfect accent. And I think it came to the point where it actually affected my English. And it's something that I'm kind of letting go of right now because that, you know, I don't have to speak Amharic in a certain type of way in order to speak it. Like I know the words, I know what people are saying. And if people think that I can't speak it and they try to talk in front of me like that, then they ain't worth my time. But the second time was when I went to a hair salon, and the hair salonist's baby was in the room, and he started coughing because of the heat from like the blow dryer and like the hooded dryer and all of the materials that were being used. And I was like, he should go. I was like, you know, like you should take him outside. Like someone should take him outside, or like, you know, so that way he can breathe the air properly. And then one of the other hair salonists was like, oh, what a soft American. And it just sort of it hurt me because that here I was making a point about something that would be beneficial for the health of a child, and then I was being told that I was being a soft American girl and that I didn't have the right to say that because it's different than it is in America. Like that was basically the reason. So it ended up I don't know exactly how it changed my behavior per se, but it definitely changed my mindset on like I think that was like one of the turning points in terms of me being like how I felt so separate from being an Ethiopian and how much I really, really wanted to just like leave at that moment because, you know, it felt like I wasn't being accepted. And I felt like everything that I was saying was being perceived as that soft American girl type of thing.
This is the second question I actually had planned to follow up the first one. What are some aspects of your cultural identity that you've held on to strongly throughout the years?
So one of the strongest things that well, first of all, language actually. So I speak Amharic now, and it has been a journey in terms of learning it. I don't speak it perfectly. I still speak it with an American accent, but it is really it's profound the way that it's affected my interpretation of language in general because that English and Amharic are very, very different. Like even in terms of names, your name in Amharic, your name in Ethiopia is probably going to be like a verb or like some type of word that actually exists in the language. While in America, people are usually named after like biblical figures, like I don't know, Moses, for example, but also like flowers or you know like things like that, and it's just affected the way that I describe things and how I perceive things and how I use language to communicate that to people. Another thing that I've held on to is food. I know how to cook Ethiopian food. I'm not as good as my mom, not as good as my cousins. I'm not gonna put myself up to that level. But you know, being able to cook has really influenced me because that it's sort of the one thing that no matter where you come from, everyone always loves to eat.
Yep.
And exactly. So like even though I don't cook the way like you know, I don't cook the way an Ethiopian does. I use a different type of knife. I cook inside a kitchen. In Ethiopia, like the kitchen is like it's an entire room like outside of the house. So even though we cook food differently, we cook the same food and we eat the same food and we love it and we use the same spices, and that's kind of always been a way for me to like still hold on to that connection. And lastly, I would also say clothing. I don't wear Ethiopian clothing as much as I probably should, but every single time I do, it makes me feel like it's just like I physically feel the Abasha in me just being like, I'm so proud of you, you know what I mean? And also, wait, no, that wasn't the last point. Music. I jam out to Ethiopian music all the time, to the point where on my Spotify playlist, I just have like a separate category that's like Ethiopian bops.
Going back on topic, the next question is about the media and identity. What are some ways, either in general or if you have a personal example you want to share, that you feel that the media has shaped both people's identity and how they portray themselves regarding their identity?
Does it have to do? I don't have to specifically talk about being Ethiopian, right?
No, this can be just in general or any
So,
other thing you want to relate it to.
so I remember in like watching the news a lot when I was younger, because my parents didn't necessarily filter me in terms of like what media I consume. So from a very young age, I would like at like 6 years old, I already knew about like what a pedophile was, or like what a serial killer was. But I kind of noticed that the media had this tendency to portray people of different races in different ways. So I think we obviously know, for example, that whenever a black person had committed a crime, they would be called like a thug, and they would have like their prison photo be showed as like the picture of them that was used. But whenever it was someone who was white, they would use like a picture from like their family, or like, something that was like very innocuous, like them just like skiing or whatever, basically not their prison photo. um and the words that they used were different. Like for the white person it would be softer, while with the black person it would be more harsh. Now obviously I agree that you should describe crime harshly, because crime is wrong, and if someone did something heinous, then that shouldn't be held back, or it should be as held back as possible, or it should be as communicated as possible, given that journalism needs to be in a certain type of way. But I just sort of noticed that it was much like there was this much harsher portrayal of black people in the media than there was of white people. And it sort of affect like unfortunately, it did affect my outlook when I was like really young. I thought that, I just thought that black people just committed more crime, and it wasn't good for me at all. And I think that's almost exactly the reason why I wish that my parents had filtered the media a little bit more, because a 6-year old should not be thinking something like that. But I luckily have grown, obviously, and I understand that, the media portrays things in the ways that it wants to portray. There's a system that, regardless of when something is liberal like CNN, well, MSNBC, I'm going to say MSNBC, or something conservative like Fox News or Breitbart, two very different types of conservative. Um, you know, the media essentially has an agenda, and they're just trying to fulfill that agenda. And I've kind of learned to, although it has affected my outlook, I know it's probably permanently affected my outlook. I have learned to not take it to heart anymore, the way that the media portrays things. And I always have like kind of like my bias check all the time whenever I'm reading the news or whenever I'm watching the news.
Okay. Our next question is about imposter syndrome. Are you aware of what imposter syndrome is, first of all?
Yeah, I know what imposter syndrome is, but can you just define it for the sake of?
For the sake of discussion, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
So imposter syndrome is basically this thing where in a certain field you don't recognize your own accomplishments because you don't feel as if they are your own. You basically feel like an imposter in your field. So my question for you is has there ever been a time where you've experienced imposter syndrome, and would you be comfortable sharing with us that example and also how you dealt with it?
I actually have three whole examples. Is that okay?
Yes, we can go through all three.
Okay, so the first time I had I didn't know what it was imposter syndrome because I was in middle school, but it was when I got into my middle school. When I had first entered the room, I had seen people who didn't look like me, and it kind of planted this idea in my head that I didn't really belong there, because it's like, how are you the only black female in the room? And I wouldn't say that it like heavily affected me, because that I was very young, and it was something that I just sort of brushed off as, well, you're here because you should be here. Like, you took the test, you took the test, and you wrote the answers, you wrote your essays or whatever. So that, I would say, was kind of just like a meh type of moment. But when I really got imposter syndrome was when I got into Brooklyn Tech. I didn't have the money to afford SHSAT prep, and I had pretty much gotten into the school by using a Barron's book that I got from Barnes and Noble for like $30. I think, or actually, I'm gonna hold back on that price actually, because I don't actually, I wasn't the one who bought it, but yeah, like we'll really never know. I don't know how the economy was in 2014, but yeah, I remember how I got into the school, and then in freshman year I wasn't doing so well. And it was really frustrating because I was really putting in my hours of effort. I would always study. I would always reread my work. I would always, I would watch videos, and I was still getting poor scores. Meanwhile, there were kids around me who the only studying they did was being in class. Sometimes they were asleep during class, and they went home and they just, they played video games or something. Like, they weren't studying, and they had done much better. And it made me feel like I didn't belong at tech, that I should have gone to just like my zone school. And it wasn't until sophomore year when I began to really, the way that I had dealt with it was, I kind of was like, I wouldn't be a tech. I wouldn't have gotten into tech if I didn't to some degree deserve it. I studied, like I said before, I had gotten into the school by using a book. That's pretty amazing for what it's worth, given how hard the SHSAT is and how hard it is to get into a specialized high school in the first place. And that's kind of how I was able to talk myself out of the mindset that I didn't belong at tech. And in order to deal with my poor grades, I changed my studying method. I realized that I was studying harder, not smarter. And I was doing so much work, but I wasn't actually understanding the material in front of me. So that's what I ended up targeting, and I ended up having a 90 plus average for the rest of high school. Thank you. And the third time I had imposter syndrome was when I got into the public policy program at my college. It's called JFU. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's basically for females within the public policy who are getting a public policy certificate, or they're in the public policy minor. And it's to help them essentially get footing in the public policy world. I didn't think I deserved it because I felt like I was such a sleaze throughout college. You know what I mean? Like, I was just, I felt like of all the people, wouldn't get it in the first place, because that I wasn't exactly the most hardworking student in the world, and I didn't feel like I was I struggled a lot in class to pay attention, just because, in high school we had 40-minute classes. Now the classes are an hour to 3 hours long. It was a very different environment, and it was to the point where I was like, I guess I don't, I really don't feel like I belong here. But I had talked with the coordinator actually, and I had talked with a really close friend, and they all had so much sincere belief in me. And I know that you should probably detach your ego from how others perceive you, but at the same time, it was just the way that they believed in me really helped me believe in myself. And I'm still in the program right now, and I'm thriving in it. I love it so much, and I'm so happy to be in it.
Our positive affirmation.
Wow. Good.
Thank you.
What is some advice you would give to students who are struggling with either imposter syndrome or their sense of identity in general?
In terms of imposter syndrome, I would just say you're here for a reason. That's kind of how I reminded myself throughout each moment, that I wouldn't be here if I didn't fulfill the requirements to do so, especially given the competitiveness of each of those things. So you're definitely here for a reason. In terms of dealing with the difficulty of maybe being in that situation, so like being a tech, for example, given its rigorous curriculums, um, you know, really just master your understanding of the actual topics, and then that'll ultimately give you more confidence in terms of how to complete the tests and whatever, and then you'll succeed, and you'll really, over time, you shouldn't build your identity around like the accomplishments that you have, if that makes sense, because I feel like that kind of just makes your ego a little too big. But just understand that you're there for a reason. I'm sorry it's not any more than that, but I feel like that's kind of the best way of putting it. And in terms of struggling with your identity, like I said before, your identity is just you. You are Moses, you are Alexandria. Like there's everything else is secondary in a sense. You have to understand that your identity characteristics are just simply that. They're characteristics that describe like a phenotype essentially. And you don't have to use that as anything more than a descriptor, a physical descriptor. Obviously with other identity, and there are like, really consider what you factor into your identity. Why is it that I should identify as someone who is a Black female when instead something that I really identify, I really want people to see me as, at least as a kind person, as an empathetic person, as someone who's patient. There are so many things that go into who you are as a person that you shouldn't just limit yourself to, these demographic questions.
What is some advice in general that you would give to students during this time with online courses and everything else crazy going on in the world?
Oh my God. Zoom with your friends, please. Zoom with your friends. Have Zoom dates. Set up a block of time to just eat dinner or lunch or something with your friends. I'm in an internship. I'm in an alumni internship, and that's actually where I got to know my best friend. And right now we're in the process of just like completing it. And every single time after the meetings, we always have like these 3-hour conversations just catching up. And sometimes we eat food. Sometimes, he's with his siblings and whatever. It's like, it's a really chill time. In terms of actual like studying in online courses, I personally learn best online anyway. I'm the type of person who always looks up videos to the subject that I'm learning. So this honestly isn't very tough on me personally. But in terms of, I know that a lot of people struggle in terms of, the fact that it's, yes. Yes, in terms of the fact that it's all online and that you're not physically in the class. What I would actually do is change the environment that you're in. It's to really set up your space as a place that you want to study in. I'm actually in the process of reorganizing my room right now, and something that I'm really putting like at number 1 is just changing up my desk. I'm going to like, Moses actually gave me the advice of changing the light color that you use. I'm going to do that. I'm also going to have certain type of music on whenever I'm studying. And whenever I'm in, whenever I'm in class, I always make sure that my door is completely shut, so that way my mom and brother know that I can't be disturbed right now. I know that obviously not everyone has the privilege of having their own room, but trying to make it as clear as possible to the people around you that you shouldn't, you're in class right now. And also use the chat. Like, ain't nobody gonna know your face anyway. Like, I'm always talking in the chat like about like the concepts that we learn. So that's sort of like my advice.
Okay. One thing I did want to point out, are we not going to talk about the fact that we just ended up wearing the same color shirt?
Yeah, I was literally gonna say, like, I was like looking at it and I was like,
Very interesting. I didn't even notice that.
It's because I identify as Moses.
Yes, I do occasionally identify as Makeda as well. Well, that was our last question. So again, thank you for doing this. I understand that you have a busy schedule and you had a lot of other things that you could have been doing right now. Thank you for choosing to do this instead.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay. Later, Makeda.
All right. Bye-bye.